Hello everyone, so my name is Ali and I'm a PhD student at Murdoch University, almost at the end of my PhD. And I've been looking at public preferences and plant performance in streetscape plantings, but today I'll just talk about the public preferences side of that. And I've kind of used the Woody Meadow project as a bit of a case study for my PhD. And so this is a kind of planting type that uses a high diversity of species, planted really densely in 3 layers. So you've got a base layer, a mid layer, and an upper layer, and then maintained through coppicing. So we try and pick plants that would naturally resprout in response to a fire, but we come through, cut them back kind of 10 to 20 centimetres above the ground every 3 to 4 years, and that also stimulates that resprouting response, and the result is a really dense, bushy planting that theoretically doesn't require much maintenance. And the idea is to try and transform some of our lower maintenance areas in our public spaces, like along Stirling Highway there, into more biodiverse plantings. And so I was interested in looking at the aesthetic preferences of the public for different woody meadow type plantings. And I was interested in aesthetics for a number of reasons. Like Emma said, they're really important cultural ecosystem service. And like the health benefits that we heard about earlier this morning, they're related to how aesthetic value is provided by that landscape. And so if you imagine walking past this street tree up the top, you're not going to feel as great as if you're walking past that Kings Park annual display, which they've obviously got very different levels of maintenance, but you get the idea behind that. Not all green spaces equal. Aesthetic landscapes can also promote stewardship and, importantly, encourage social and council support as well, which is really needed if we want to get more biodiverse plantings in our urban areas. That brings me to the question though, well, what is an aesthetic landscape? And there are a few theories out there that would suggest that we would prefer more open landscapes with open views and scattered trees, and that stems from our early human evolution out of Africa, where there was a savanna-style landscape. But how this works in an urban area isn't too clear because we've got lots of buildings that block those potentials anyway. And then the habitat theory suggests we would prefer landscapes that would confer future survival, so flowers indicate food, and green foliage generally indicates healthy plants. But then again, how this works in the southwest of Australia, which is a biodiversity hotspot, we have really unique flora, wasn't too well studied. And local context, environmental worldviews and knowledge and demographics also all play a role in individual preferences for our landscapes. So again, I've grown up in Perth. I'm used to seeing grey bushy plants around, so my preferences are going to be quite different to someone who hasn't grown up here. So that brings me to my research hypotheses. Was one, that woody meadows would be preferred over lawn because they do have more of those flowers and that green foliage. And there would be a preference for woody meadows with no mid-layer to maintain that open sightlines and flowers and green foliage. And lastly, preferences would be stronger from respondents with pro-environmental worldviews, more knowledge from greener suburbs, and demographics has a bit of a question mark because there's some interesting results out there about that. So to test these hypotheses, I conducted an online survey which was open early 2022 to people in Perth. I had 985 respondents, which was really great. There was some self-selection bias associated with that, but that's hard to avoid with opt-in surveys. And I sent this survey out mostly through Facebook, community Facebook pages. Some local councils put it out through their communication channels, and I put posters up around, but I think I got 5 responses from the posters, so probably not worth driving around to all the community halls, but too late for that. And I asked all of these people who did the survey to rate a series of images that I made. So I went round, I took photos of plants that would be suitable for woody meadows. I cut them all out on Photoshop and I stitched them back together to create a series of images that systematically change the different layers of the planting like I spoke about before. Then the presence and absence of flowers, and the presence and absence of grey foliage included with the green. And I also included this image of lawn as a bit of a baseline. I'm sure we've all seen a landscape like that around us. And I just asked people, oh, oh, I don't have it on there. I asked people on a 5-point Likert scale how much they liked the appearance of each of these images. Anyone like the appearance of that lawn? Yeah, so my respondents thought so too. So 87% of people disliked the look of lawn, which is quite a lot. It was a lot stronger than I expected, given lawn is so common in our urban landscapes. And then in contrast to that, 88% of people liked the look of this woody meadow here. In terms of structure, this one was surprising. So the most preferred woody meadow actually did have that mid layer. And that goes against some of those theories that I put out there earlier. So it doesn't maintain open sightlines at all. And this could be due to the urban context where we don't have those sightlines anyway, because we have the fences and the buildings. It could be to cover that ugly fence. It could also be to the Perth context where we do have the naturally occurring shrub layer. In terms of flowers, this is a bit of a no-brainer, but flowers were way preferred over no flowers, and that was especially important with plantings that had that mid-layer. So when the mid-layer had flowers, they were much more preferred as well. And then in terms of foliage colour, this one was also interesting. So a mix of green and grey foliage was most preferred, which goes against most of the literature, but that's been taken place in temperate climates. So I think it's important to consider the location here in a Mediterranean type climate. We do have the grey plants naturally occurring, so people are familiar with seeing them. And it also adds diversity and some interest to the planting as well. So that's a kind of overview of what aspects of woody meadow plantings were preferred. Then I wanted to see kind of what were some of the influencing factors behind that. And so one of the questions that I asked people as well was to self-rate their knowledge of Australian plants. And they could pick from poor to average to good. And so respondents that self-rated their knowledge of Australian plants as good, given here in green, had much stronger preferences. So they had a more positive preference for all the woody meadow images and a stronger dislike for lawn compared to respondents that rated their knowledge as average and as poor. And that's what I'm talking about on the next slide when I say a stronger preference. I mean a stronger positive preference for woody meadows and a stronger negative preference for lawn. So in terms of gender, females had stronger preferences. We tended to dislike lawn more than males and like woody meadow images more than males. Higher education resulted in a decreased preference for lawn, but didn't influence preferences for woody meadow images. Pro-environmental worldviews, environmental involvement, and just a general interest in plants all resulted in a stronger dislike for lawn and a stronger like for woody meadow images. I gave half of the respondents a small infographic on the Woody Meadow project prior to them rating these images, and respondents that received that infographic had a lower preference for lawn compared to those that didn't receive it. And I think that the negative emotions associated with that can be channeled in a positive way to create change to move away from lawn. But interestingly, it didn't actually impact woody meadow preferences. So that's an interesting one there. Plant knowledge I already talked about. And then at a suburb scale, respondents that lived in suburbs with a higher tree cover, it didn't impact their preferences for lawn. And I think that's because lawn is so common even in any type of suburb, tree cover or no tree cover. But interestingly, it did increase their preferences for woody meadows. And I think that's where the familiarity aspect comes in. If you're used to seeing trees and more vegetation around, you're going to be more familiar with it and possibly like it more. And that's it. Basically, I think it's really important to consider local context, as everyone here in this room has already spoken about, because a lot of the things that I've found from this haven't been reflected in other research around. And so it is really important to consider our local landscape and also the people living in this area as well and what they think. And if you'd like to know more, you can look that up. So thank you.